Did you know Churchill saved Britain from Hitler, then got fired before the war even ended? Winston Churchill was born in 1874 into one of England's most powerful families. He was a soldier, a writer, and a politician who never knew how to stay quiet. Through the 1930s, Churchill warned anyone who would listen that Hitler was a threat. Nobody wanted to hear it. He was mocked, sidelined, and called a reckless warmonger. For nearly a decade, he sat in the political wilderness while Britain looked the other way. Then 1940 arrived. France fell. Every major voice in Britain pushed for a peace deal with Hitler. Churchill refused. Flat out refused. He stood in Parliament and promised nothing but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. And somehow, it worked. Britain held on. The tide turned. But in July 1945, with the war still finishing in the Pacific, British voters threw him out in a landslide. The same stubbornness that saved Western civilization made him impossible to live with in peacetime. History needed him exactly once, and he delivered. Did you know Hannibal spent 15 years undefeated in Italy and still lost the war? Hannibal Barca was born around 247 BC in Carthage, in what is now Tunisia. His father was a general, and Hannibal grew up with one obsession: destroy Rome. In 218 BC, he made one of history's boldest moves. He crossed the Alps with tens of thousands of soldiers and war elephants, shocking the entire Roman world. Then he delivered blow after blow. At Trebia, at Lake Trasimene, and finally at Cannae in 216 BC, he wiped out Roman armies so completely that historians still study his tactics today. But Rome refused to break. Instead of fighting Hannibal directly, Roman general Fabius kept avoiding battle and wore Carthage down from the outside. Rome attacked Carthage's allies, cut off Hannibal's supplies, and eventually invaded Carthage itself. Hannibal was recalled home and finally defeated at Zama in 202 BC. He spent his final years as a fugitive and died by his own poison rather than surrender. The greatest general of the ancient world was beaten not by a better army, but by a smarter strategy. Did you know Abraham Lincoln's friends hid knives from him because they feared he would take his own life? Abraham Lincoln was born in 1809 in a log cabin in Kentucky. His mother died when he was 9. He grew up poor, mostly self-taught, and read by firelight whenever he could. In his 20s and 30s, Lincoln faced loss after loss. A business failed. His first love, Anne Rutledge, died young. He lost multiple elections, and he fell into a depression so deep that people close to him removed sharp objects from his home to keep him safe. Most men would have stopped there. Lincoln didn't. He became a lawyer, then a congressman, then in 1860 he won the presidency. Almost immediately, the country split apart. The Civil War killed over 600,000 Americans. Lincoln guided the nation through every brutal year of it, signing the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 and holding the Union together by sheer will. He never stopped carrying the darkness inside him. He just refused to let it win. Did you know JFK was the only man in the room who refused to start World War III? John F. Kennedy was born in 1917 in Massachusetts into one of America's wealthiest families. Too young, too Catholic, too inexperienced, that was all anyone said when he ran for president in 1960. He won anyway, becoming the 35th president at just 43 years old. His early days were rough. The Bay of Pigs invasion failed completely. Soviet leader Khrushchev pushed him around at their first summit. Many wrote him off as a lightweight. Then came October 1962. American spy planes spotted Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. Every general and advisor in the room pushed Kennedy to bomb them immediately. Military leaders were certain attack was the only option. Kennedy said no. For 13 days, with nuclear war hours away, he held the line. He chose a naval blockade, kept talking, and forced a peaceful solution. The Soviets backed down. No bombs fell, no cities burned. The world survived because one man refused to be pushed. Did you know Columbus died believing he had never reached America? Christopher Columbus was born around 1451 in Genoa, Italy. He grew up near the sea and became an experienced sailor and navigator. In 1492, he convinced the Spanish crown to fund a westward voyage to reach Asia. After 10 weeks at sea, he landed in the Caribbean. He called the people he found there Indians, certain he had reached the Indies. He had not. Columbus made 4 voyages to the Americas and never once accepted what was right in front of him. He died in 1506, still insisting he had found a western route to Asia. The Spanish had already stripped him of his titles and had him arrested. He died largely forgotten. While Columbus was sailing, an Italian explorer named Amerigo Vespucci correctly identified the lands as a new continent entirely. Mapmakers named the continent after Amerigo, not Columbus. The man who accidentally changed the world never knew what he had found, and history gave the credit to someone else. Did you know the man behind millions of Soviet deaths once studied to become a priest? Joseph Stalin was born in 1878 in a small town in Georgia, then part of the Russian Empire. His family was desperately poor. His father was a drunk. His mother scrubbed floors to send him to school. He was brilliant. He won a scholarship to a seminary in Tbilisi, wrote poetry that got published in Georgian newspapers, and was known as one of the sharpest students in the building. Then he found a copy of Marx in the library and everything changed. He dropped the Bible and picked up revolution. He joined underground movements, organized strikes, robbed banks to fund the Bolsheviks, and got exiled to Siberia multiple times. Each time he came back harder. By 1924, he controlled the Soviet Union. The patience he learned in the seminary, the ability to read people, to wait and strike at exactly the right moment, he used all of it to build one of the most brutal regimes in human history. The priest became the executioner. Did you know FDR led America through World War II from a body that was almost completely paralyzed? Franklin Roosevelt was born in 1882 into a wealthy New York family. He seemed destined for greatness until 1921, when polio struck him at age 39 and took the use of his legs forever. Most people would have disappeared from public life. Roosevelt didn't. He spent years rebuilding his strength and his image, hiding the full truth of his condition from the American people. Photographers agreed not to shoot him in his wheelchair. Staff lifted him in and out of cars. The Secret Service blocked any footage that showed him struggling. Behind that carefully protected image stood a man doing the impossible. He pulled America out of the Great Depression with the New Deal. He built the alliance with Churchill and Stalin that crushed the Axis powers. He planned the largest military operation in human history. He died in April 1945, just weeks before Germany surrendered, never seeing the victory he made possible. The man who couldn't stand changed the entire world. Did you know the man who wrote, "All men are created equal," owned over 600 enslaved people? Thomas Jefferson was born in 1743 in Virginia to a wealthy planter family. He became a lawyer, a thinker, and one of the most gifted writers of his generation. In 1776, he wrote the Declaration of Independence, giving the world its most powerful language of human freedom. But Jefferson owned enslaved people his entire life. He knew it was wrong. He wrote that it was wrong. He privately agonized that it was wrong, and he still never freed them. Jefferson served as the second vice president and then the third president of the United States. He doubled the size of the nation with the Louisiana Purchase. His legacy looked enormous from the outside, but when he died in 1826, he was buried in debt. His estate was auctioned off to pay his creditors, and nearly every person he had enslaved was sold along with it. Jefferson gave America its greatest ideals and proved how hard those ideals are to actually live. Did you know Joan of Arc was burned as a heretic by the same church that later made her a saint? Joan of Arc was born in 1412 in a small French village. She was a peasant girl with no military training and no political power. But at 17, she claimed God was speaking to her, telling her to save France. And she did. She led armies, broke a months-long siege at Orleans, and marched a king to his own coronation. France was losing a war it had fought for nearly a century. Joan changed that in a matter of months. Then the king she crowned did nothing to save her. She was captured in 1430, handed to the English, and put on trial for heresy. She was 19 years old when they burned her alive. France stayed silent. The church that condemned her reversed its verdict 25 years later. 5 centuries after her death, in 1920, that same church made her a saint. Joan saved a kingdom. The kingdom let her burn. Did you know the CIA tried to kill Fidel Castro over 600 times and never once succeeded? Fidel Castro was born in 1926 in Cuba, the son of a wealthy sugar plantation owner. He trained as a lawyer but had bigger plans. In 1953, he launched a rebellion against Cuba's military dictatorship. It failed and he was thrown in prison. Most people would have stopped there. Castro didn't. In 1956, he returned with just 82 men. 2 years later, he took control of the entire country. That's when the United States came for him. The CIA plotted against him for decades. Exploding cigars, poisoned wetsuits, a contract with the mafia, schemes so wild they barely sound real. None of them worked. Castro outlasted 10 American presidents. He watched the Soviet Union collapse. He ruled Cuba for nearly 50 years, finally stepping down in 2008 and dying peacefully in 2016 at age 90. 638 attempts, 0 successes. Castro didn't just survive his enemies, he buried them. Did you know Attila the Hun was stopped not by any army, but by a single conversation with a priest? Attila was born around 406 AD into the Hun people, a fierce nomadic tribe from the eastern steppes. By his 30s, he ruled the most feared empire in the known world, stretching from Central Asia to the Rhine River. He burned cities across Gaul and the Balkans. Roman emperors fled their own capitals at the sound of his name. In 452 AD, he marched his army straight toward Rome itself. The city had no real defense left. Then Pope Leo I rode out to meet him alone. They spoke, and Attila turned around. No one fully knows why, even today. 2 years later, on the night of his wedding, Attila was found dead in his bed. No battle, no sword, just a nosebleed that would not stop. Within a generation, his entire empire had collapsed and vanished. The man who made Rome tremble was undone quietly, in the dark, completely alone. Did you know Socrates never wrote a single word, yet changed the world forever? Socrates was born in Athens around 470 BC. He was not a king, not a general, not a wealthy man. He was a barefoot philosopher who spent his days in the streets asking questions that made powerful people deeply uncomfortable. He never wrote anything down. Everything we know about him comes from his students, especially a young man named Plato, who watched his teacher closely and recorded every word he could. Socrates believed that questioning everything was not just a habit, it was the only way to truly live. He called it the examined life. Athens eventually grew tired of him. In 399 BC, he was put on trial for corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. The jury gave him a way out. He could leave Athens, stay quiet, and survive. He refused. He argued that a life lived in silence and fear was not worth living. He drank the hemlock and died on his own terms. Socrates won the argument by giving up everything. Did you know a peasant farmer's son conquered China with nothing but strategy and willpower? Mao Zedong was born in 1893 in rural China, dirt poor, in a country torn apart by warlords and foreign powers. Almost no one gave him a chance. But Mao was relentless. He built a revolutionary army from the ground up, surviving brutal military campaigns, impossible retreats, and years of hiding in the mountains. In 1934, he led his forces on the Long March, a 6,000-mile fighting retreat that became the stuff of legend. Generals with far more resources couldn't stop him. By 1949, Mao stood in Beijing and declared the People's Republic of China. He had done what almost no one thought possible. Then came the cost. In 1958, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward, a forced transformation of Chinese society that he believed would modernize the country overnight. Instead, it triggered the deadliest famine in human history. Between 30 and 55 million people died in just 4 years. The man who liberated China became its greatest destroyer. No rise and fall in modern history cuts quite that deep. Did you know Republican bosses made Teddy Roosevelt vice president just to stop him? Theodore Roosevelt was born in 1858 in New York City, a sickly, asthmatic child who could barely breathe. He refused to accept that. He trained his body relentlessly, became a boxer, a rancher in the Dakotas, and led a cavalry charge up San Juan Hill in Cuba that made him a national hero. By 1900, he was too popular, too unpredictable, and too dangerous to the political machine. So party bosses pushed him into the vice presidency, a powerless role designed to silence him. It worked, for 6 months. Then President McKinley was assassinated, and in September 1901, Roosevelt was sworn in as the youngest president in American history at just 42 years old. The men who tried to bury him had handed him everything. He used it all. He broke up the most powerful monopolies in the country, built the Panama Canal, and created over 230 million acres of protected land, almost inventing conservation as a concept. They tried to contain a force of nature. Instead, they unleashed it.